In the Dillingham family, the town of Paint Rock has been sort of a mythical place. My grandpa, Bill Dillingham, always talked about the days he spent in Paint Rock as a young man. However, it is not on any maps, and very little information exists about it. We knew it was near Van Buren, Missouri, but that was about it. We found Paint Rock Bluff on a float trip map. That was about 10 miles up the current river from Van Buren, so this is the starting point for our search. Van Buren is in Carter County, but Paint Rock Bluff is in Shannon County. So we called the county courthouse in Eminence. The county clerk was very helpful and recalled that just the day before, a man was there who mentioned owning land at Paint Rock. She put us in touch with him, and sure enough, he owns 500 acres where the town of Paint Rock used to be. After a couple of phone calls, it was time for a road trip. We started from Sullivan. Alan, Donna, Jim, and Irene Rubel, and we picked up Delcy Jones in Ironton, and it was off to find Paint Rock. With our new friend's help, we found Paint Rock Cemetery after traveling many miles down an old gravel road and getting lost a few times. When we pulled up to the picturesque valley and saw the Paint Rock Cemetery sign, both Irene and Delcy gasped, not believing they were actually in Paint Rock, a place they had heard about for over 80 years. We have no known relatives buried here, but it is the only thing still existing of the town. He said there were also many foundations in the area from houses, a school, and stores. We were in Paint Rock, or what was left of it. We then followed a gravel road on further to the current river and saw Paint Rock Bluff. It gets its name from the Native American paintings on the bluff itself. But this story starts much earlier. My great-great-grandpa, William Pope Dillingham, was born in 1822 in Franklin County, Illinois, which is near Cape Girardeau, Missouri. His parents were William and Mourning Dillingham. William first married Rachel Safford and then married Sarah Anderson. Between the two marriages, he had 7 children, 2 with Rachel and 5 with Sarah. One of the children with Sarah was John Pope Dillingham, who was born March 1860 in Williamson County, Illinois. Not much is known about John Pope's childhood. John Pope's father, William, passed away very suddenly at his home in Williamson County in 1893. John Pope was at his bedside when he passed, so I would assume he was still living in the area at the time. The next found records are the 1900 census in Carter County, Missouri. This lists John Pope as living in Carter County, working as a railroad tie maker, and renting a house. He is 40 years old. So between 1893 and 1900, he moved from Illinois to Missouri, most likely to Chicopee. The timber business exploded in the Missouri Ozarks in the 1880s. A century of colonial demand had depleted the forest in the eastern U.S., and the South had been extensively burned during the Civil War. The country was rebuilding after the Civil War and needed lumber. There were vast tracts of virgin timber in the Missouri Ozarks. The Missouri Lumber and Mining Company purchased over 300,000 acres of land in Carter, Shannon, and Reynolds County. They convinced the railroad to run a spur from the main line through Chicopee to Grandin, Missouri. In 1889, the nation's largest sawmill started producing lumber in Grandin. At its peak, the production of the mill would consume 70 acres of forest per day. Logs were hauled to the mill by rail, wagon, and where possible, by the current river. They stretched a boom across the river at Chicopee to catch the logs floated down from upstream. Here, they would be loaded onto the rail and carried to the mill at Grandin. As John Pope Dillingham was listed in the 1900 census as living in Carter County and being in the timber business, I would guess he moved from Illinois to work in this booming timber industry. His son, my grandpa Bill Dillingham, said he lived as a child in Chicopee, which is in Carter County and the epicenter for supplying timber to the mill at Grandin. Grandpa Dillingham also talked about carrying water from Big Spring as a boy. Big Spring is now a national park and located just south of Chicopee. We visited Big Spring during this road trip. This little cave is at the mouth of Big Spring. I guarantee my Grandpa Dillingham went in this cave. How could any young boy resist? John Pope Dillingham met and married Rosa Eddy Bell Campbell on January 9, 1900. She must have been from the area, as she was born in Missouri and her father and brother all lived locally. They had 4 children: Dan, Goldie, William, and Garland. William, my grandpa, was born September 24, 1904. John Pope passed away in 1908 for unknown reasons. He is buried in Aldrich Valley Cemetery, located near Van Buren. Here is Irene Rubel at the cemetery on the day of our visit.
You like this? Okay, Mom.
And then she got that. Oh, well, I lost my. No, here's my thing.
Okay, go.
Okay. This is where my dad's dad, John Pope Dillingham, was buried. He was born in 1860 and died in 1907. My dad was just about 3 or 4 years old when he died. I never could find out what he died of. But his grandfather, Rosie's father, was buried here, Elisha Campbell. And so I'm sure that's why when John Pope died that Rosie buried him here by her dad. And this is Rosie's brother, Bud, James Bud.
James William Bud Campbell died June the 23rd, 1974, aged 90 years,
Wow.
9 months and 19 days.
Okay. When did he die?
1974.
Okay, that's why he just got a marker. But Mom said that Bud always got. He had a pet bear, and he would drink a lot, and he'd put his pet bear in the front seat of the car with him and drive around town all the time, so everybody knew him by his pet bear. But anyway, when Mom died, we each got a little bit of money, so I took some of my money and had a tombstone made for my grandpa, and we picked out a spot. We knew he's buried here somewhere, and me and Jim and Butch, my brother, put this in. But this is Aldrich Valley Cemetery.
This is Alan Rubel at the Aldrich Valley Cemetery. To my right is the grave of John Pope Dillingham. To my left is the grave of Eli Campbell. He is the father of Rosie Eddy Bell Dillingham, John Pope's wife. After John Pope passed, Rosie married Vortiman Webster, as shown in the 1910 Carter County Census, but he did not live very long. The 1920 census shows her married to Bill Poston when Grandpa was 15 years old and lived at home. I believe they still lived in Chicopee at this time, as it is in Carter County, but Mr. Poston was listed as a farmer on the census. Mr. Poston didn't treat the Dillingham boys very well, so Dan, Bill, and Garland left home sometime after 1920. I believe this is when they moved to Paint Rock, which is in Shannon County. They would have worked in the timber as Paint Rock was a logging town, but by this time the timber boom was slowing down. This is when my grandpa started as a fishing guide on the Current River, and they started up the band. They would travel around the area playing dances. He met my grandma, Opal Matthews, at one of these dances, and they married in 1932. They moved to Camp Creek, Missouri. His story picks up from here in the Bill Dillingham video. I am not sure what year it was, but Paint Rock sprang up quickly, as most of these logging towns did. The company hauled in portable houses, others built houses, and some people even lived in tents. A school, churches, and stores were built. The company would send doctors and pharmacists around to these logging camps periodically. Paint Rock was a busy place. Up to 1,000 people lived in this community at its peak. Pine logs were cut from the surrounding forest and hauled to the river by mule team. The hardwood trees were hacked into ties and floated down the river to build railroad spurs. I believe Bill was still living in Paint Rock when he met my grandma, Opal Matthews. She mentions in her notes that shortly after they were married, they moved to Camp Creek, so they might have lived in Paint Rock for a short time. Once again, this story picks up from here in the Bill Dillingham video. As the mills moved on, these timber towns slowly faded away. The timber business is still active today in the area. Some of these logging towns survived, but most are long gone. Paint Rock is one that did not survive. The cemetery and some foundations are all that is left of this once robust but short-lived community.